The European Union is one of the most unusual political projects in the world. It is not a country, because its 27 member states remain sovereign nations with their own governments, elections, languages, armies, and national identities. But it is also much more than a normal international organization, because it can make laws, regulate markets, negotiate trade deals, and influence the daily lives of hundreds of millions of people. As of 2026, the EU covers more than 4.2 million square kilometers and has a population of just under 452 million. Economically, its member states together produce around 1/6 of global output, making the EU one of the most powerful economic blocs on Earth. The key to understanding it is this: European countries have chosen to share some powers where acting together gives them more influence than acting alone. The EU is often called a sui generis political entity, meaning it is in a category of its own. It has features of a federation, because some decisions are made at a European level and can apply across all member states. But it also has features of a confederation, because national governments still control many core powers and must agree before the EU can act in certain areas. This balance is what makes the EU both powerful and complicated. It is built on treaties, not a single national constitution. Every major expansion of EU authority has come from agreements between member states. So the EU is best understood as a system where countries pool sovereignty in selected areas, while keeping sovereignty in others. The original purpose of European integration was deeply connected to peace. After two devastating world wars, leaders in Western Europe wanted to make another major war between European powers not just unlikely, but materially difficult. One early idea was to place coal and steel production under shared control, because those industries were essential for building weapons and rebuilding economies. This led to the European Coal and Steel Community. The founding group, often called the Inner Six, included Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. These countries began cooperating in specific economic sectors, then gradually expanded that cooperation into wider markets, institutions, and policies. What began as a peace project became an economic and political union. A central building block of the EU is the customs union. In simple terms, a customs union means member countries remove customs duties between themselves and apply a common external trade policy toward goods coming from outside. This matters because it turns separate national markets into something much larger and more predictable. A company in one member state can sell goods into another without facing the same barriers that would exist between unrelated countries. Over time, this helped pave the way for the EU's internal single market. But the single market goes further than tariffs. It aims to reduce legal, technical, and regulatory obstacles so that trade and economic activity can flow more freely across national borders. The EU's single market is based on 4 freedoms: the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. These freedoms are not just slogans. They shape how businesses operate, how workers move, how investments are made, and how consumers access products. A manufacturer can design for a market far larger than its home country. A professional may seek work in another member state. Banks, investors, and companies can move capital across borders under shared rules. Services, from transport to finance to digital platforms, are also affected by European regulations. The goal is to make economic life inside the EU feel less fragmented, even though each country still has its own culture, politics, and domestic laws. One of the most visible examples of European integration is the Schengen area, where passport controls have been abolished for travel between participating countries. For many travelers, this makes crossing some European borders feel almost like moving between regions of the same country. But Schengen is not identical to EU membership. Not every EU country is in Schengen, and some non-EU countries participate. The system depends on trust, shared border standards, police cooperation, and information exchange. It also shows both the promise and the tension of integration. Open internal borders make travel and commerce easier, but they also require common approaches to external borders, migration pressures, security risks, and crisis management. Another major pillar is the Eurozone, the group of EU member states that use the euro as their currency. As described in the source article, 21 EU member states have fully implemented the EU's economic and monetary union and use the euro. A shared currency can make trade easier because businesses and consumers do not need to constantly exchange currencies or manage exchange rate risk inside the Eurozone. It can also make Europe more visible in global finance, because the euro is one of the world's major currencies. But a shared currency also creates challenges. Countries using the same money may have different economic conditions, debt levels, productivity rates, and political priorities, which makes coordination essential. The EU does not only manage markets. It also develops common policies in areas such as agriculture, fisheries, regional development, trade, justice, and home affairs. These policies exist because member states have decided that some problems are better handled collectively. Agriculture policy can affect food supply, rural economies, and environmental standards. Fisheries policy deals with shared waters and the long-term sustainability of fish stocks. Regional development funding tries to reduce economic gaps between richer and poorer areas of the Union. Justice and home affairs cooperation can involve cross-border crime, asylum rules, and legal coordination. In each case, the EU's role reflects a basic question: where does cooperation create more stability, fairness, or efficiency than national action alone? The EU's institutional power grew through treaties. The Maastricht Treaty, which came into force in 1993, formally established the European Union and introduced EU citizenship. That idea is important because it added a political identity on top of national citizenship. EU citizens gained rights linked to living, working, voting in certain local and European elections, and receiving protection from other EU countries' diplomatic missions when their own country is not represented. Later, the Treaty of Lisbon, which came into force in 2009, gave the EU a clearer legal personality. This means the EU can act as an international legal person, sign agreements, and represent itself more coherently on the world stage. Internationally, the European Union has become a major actor. Through its common foreign and security policy, it tries to coordinate member states on external relations and defense issues. The EU maintains diplomatic missions around the world and represents itself in major institutions and forums, including the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the G7, and the G20. Its influence often comes less from military power and more from market size, regulatory strength, development aid, sanctions, and trade policy. When the EU sets standards for products, data, competition, or environmental rules, companies outside Europe may adapt because access to the European market is valuable. This is sometimes called Europe's regulatory power. Expansion has been a defining feature of the EU's story. From the original 6 countries, the project grew through successive accessions, adding 22 more states between 1973 and 2013. This enlarged the Union geographically, economically, and politically. New members gained access to markets, funding, and a seat at the European table, while the EU gained scale and influence. But enlargement also made decision-making harder. A union of 27 countries must account for very different histories, economies, security concerns, and political cultures. In 2020, the United Kingdom became the only member state to leave the EU, a moment that showed membership is reversible but deeply consequential. Meanwhile, other countries continue aspiring or negotiating to join. So what is the European Union, really? It is a peace project, a market system, a legal order, a diplomatic actor, and a political compromise all at once. Its strength comes from scale, hundreds of millions of people, a huge economy, common rules, and collective bargaining power. Its difficulty comes from the same source. 27 democracies must constantly negotiate how much power should be shared and how much should remain national. That is why the EU can look slow, technical, and bureaucratic, yet still profoundly important. It shapes borders, currencies, trade, rights, standards, and global diplomacy. The European Union is not the United States of Europe. It is a unique experiment in shared sovereignty. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.